Recording in progress.
Okay, now, has anybody tuned in?
No.
Okay. All right, it is. What is it? The middle of January, the end of January? Where are we in January?
We're at
Towards the end, aren't we?
we're at 13.
Gene,
So many.
do I want spring to come in a hurry or what?
We've still got a ways to go.
The middle of January, and we have a dusting of snow outside. Very beautiful. We sort of have two topics today, which we may or may not get to, both of them, depending on how much we wander in the first supposedly half. We're going to be talking about those amazing optical effects that we see in the sky due to our alto cirrus clouds. And then, if we have time at the end, we'll do some folklore, which I'm sure everybody's interested in. Now, I had a hard time putting this together because there are many strains of thoughts. And in pursuing Peterson's Guide to the Weather, it got way too complicated. It was like physics 101, optics 102, and what exactly happens when light waves, which if they're out in space, which is almost empty, they travel straight lines at 186,000 miles per second. But when they get to our atmosphere, things begin to change. And that's when all the magical imagery we see in the sky happens. And being curious, we want to know, what is a rainbow? Even Aristotle worked on what is a rainbow 2,500 years ago. He sort of had some of it right, but not all of it right. And all those other things that we can see in the sky, including maybe UFOs. Now, my grandson, who of course is 3 hours earlier, so he may not have gotten out of bed yet. He was supposed to research UFOs for us and rainbows. So we'll see if he gets up in time to participate. But I decided this morning we're going to start out with a little Zen session by asking, honey's laughing already, what is real? That perennial question that philosophers, religious people, curious people always ask as soon as they get to a certain age, when they begin to look around and say, what is real? And I must come up with the fact that seeing, they always say, is believing, but what you see isn't always there. Now, my first diversion, this is why we may never get to part two. I used to teach art, and I loved teaching the 2 weeks on color, how artists use color, what it is. They actually got a little bit of a scientific education to back up their use of color in their artwork. And where am I going with this? Oh, the famous pointillist from the late 1800s in France, who decided that to create a scintillating, brilliant painting, if you wanted to paint, say, an orange, you didn't use the pigments orange, which everybody had done for thousands of years, right? If you took dots of yellow and dots of red, and then if you stepped back at the end of the classroom, you saw an orange. But what happened, Melanie, if you walked up to the board and looked at it very closely?
It looked like red and yellow dots.
It looked like yellow and red dots. And then I would always say to my students who would sit there with this look on their face, where'd the orange go? Was it real? Where was it? It's obviously not on the board. And then we would talk about optical effects, how your brain takes what's there, does some magic inside your head, and you see something that isn't there. Well, I always love that sort of thing. So, but anyway, the end of the Zen for the moment, so we can move on here. Let's see. Do I want to do the myth next? Yes, I think I will jump ahead to where is she? We're going to jump back and forth here a little bit.
Okay.
And we're going to go back to those alto cirrus clouds. That's when those high altitude clouds, for us, they're about 24,000 feet high. That's about 5 miles up, and it's a thin veil across the whole sky. It's not thick enough to block out so the sunlight can shine through. And that's when we get all our effects. However, in my wandering off the main path over the weekend, there's a story I'd like to tell from the northern Scandinavian countries. Their goddess of the weather was Frigga, Frgga. And she wore white and dark gray robes. And depending on her mood, she would appear more white or darker when she got annoyed, let's say. And she lived in a palace way up there in the north. And in one of the rooms, it was called the Hall of Mists. And there she sat with her jeweled spinning wheel and spun out or wove these webs of clouds that we call the cirrus clouds, because what she wove was so fine, it was like made of silk, and it just drifted away. Now, you all know I'm pretty scientifically oriented, but that doesn't mean you can't appreciate the ancient myths when people didn't know as much about the world, but they wanted to understand it and explain it. And so they came up with these stories. Once in a while, those ancient myths are quite accurate. It's like, how did they figure that out before whatever, the telescope, the microscope? So anyway, there's Frigga sitting up there in the north, weaving her webs, and she's creating cirrus clouds. And once I said at mid-latitude, that's us, 41 degrees, we're about halfway between the equator and the poles, right? Interesting place to be. You have to go about almost 5 miles up. That's where they form. Alrighty. Now, usually we think of them, they don't precipitate. We don't get rained on, we don't get snowed on. They just float along way up there high in the sky. But in truth, they are precipitating. But what happens is they're made of ice crystals because it's so cold up there. As those ice crystals begin to float downward, gravity, the air gets warmer. And as the air gets warmer, they evaporate. So they never reach the ground. Now, modern day science can go way up there and measure the wind speeds. And they're moving quite fast, anywhere between 100 and 150 miles an hour. But for us, way down here on the ground, they don't seem to be moving very fast. But that's because they're so far away. It's like looking 20 miles across the prairie and the train is moving. It doesn't seem to be moving very fast. But if you were standing right there,
It'd be
waiting,
by you.
it'd be whizzing right by you. Okay. And that's why the mare's tails are created, because as the crystals float downward, they move slower. So no longer are they falling straight down, but they're bent. And we see the cloud then that's left as mare's tails.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that. See, I didn't know that either until I read it last week. All righty, that's the opening on that. Let me see here now where we're going. All right, before we pursue all the amazing things we see in the sky, because the sunlight is passing through these ice crystals way up there, 5 miles up. Let's back up to what's real. Now, Melanie took my astronomy class, last year or 2 years ago, whatever it's been. So she knew the answer to this. So tell us about what's happening when you're staring at the sun setting on the horizon or rising in the morning.
So it has to go through the light from the sun has to go through the
Well,
atmosphere.
let's just begin first with your observation.
Oh,
You're like,
it's there on the horizon.
right, just before it goes in. I think it takes about 2 minutes from the time that ball is sitting on the horizon, assuming you have a nice flat horizon.
Right.
Sometimes trees or whatever. Well, whatever. It takes about 2 minutes to totally disappear. Top, bottom to top. What are you seeing as it sits there on the horizon just before it begins to set?
Just before it begins to set?
Just, yeah, at that moment when the bottom,
Are you still seeing the sun?
are you still seeing the sun? Well, you're seeing the sun,
Ye-
aren't you? It's there. I'm
Yeah.
seeing it,
Yes, but then once,
but it's not there.
but it's not there, it's already gone down.
It's already gone down.
You're seeing
And no, I'm seeing it.
you're seeing a refraction of the sun, the bent light from the sun coming through the atmosphere.
What's a more, okay, most people have never thought about that. You know how we go through
Right.
life, we see what we see. But we've all had a straw in the cold, icy water in the summertime. What happens to the straw when you stick it in the water?
It looks like it's bent.
It looks like it's bent. Have you ever gone spearfishing?
I have not.
But you can, all right. But you know what it is. Here comes Jackie, our new librarian. Have you ever gone spearfishing, Jackie?
I have not.
But you know what it is.
I do.
Is it easy?
Probably not.
Why?
We have to have good accuracy and strength.
Which depends, accuracy depends on what?
What you can see.
What you can see, which is refracted in the water, what you're actually aiming at may not be there.
Exactly. That is not where you think
Jackie
it
gets a
is.
gold star for today.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the sun. As those rays of the light come into the thicker atmosphere, they're bent. And therefore, it's already gone down. And what we're seeing is the refracted or the bent light still shining above the horizon. And the same thing in the morning. It appears before it's really there. So the consequence of that is we earthlings have about a total of 4 minutes extra sunlight than really exists, which once again, my philosophical Zen mind just loves. Okay, now that we've got everybody confused, where am I going with this? Okay. Do I want to go there? Let's not. As I said before, to really understand, and if you're really curious and this fascinates you, get a book, go online and research, optical effects. What happens to light waves when they pass through prisms, essentially. Alrighty. So let's just take a moment to think about that. The simplest thing that happens is reflection. Now, when do you see light reflected? Off of what? And what do you see? Oh, it's simple. What do you do?
Doubting everything, Mary Lou.
No.
Is it or is it not there?
Alice,
Like
you
if
look in glass.
If you look in the mirror, you're seeing a reflection of yourself.
Alrighty, every morning, most of us look in the mirror and we see ourselves and whatever's behind us. And that is a simple reflection, a bouncing off. The light wave comes in, hits a smooth surface, bounces off. Now, maybe no, not yet. Remind me when we get to sun pillars, that's what's happening. The light is reflecting off of those crystals. Alrighty. However, with our straw, when light hits a denser or less dense substance, and it has to be clear, translucent, glass, pure crystals, water, then it bends. And we won't go into the reasons why. I don't think. Maybe later. We'll see how it goes. The third thing that can happen to it is that it can be interfered with. And I use the example of water skiing on a lake, and you're putting along in the wake of your motorboat, having a grand old time, and all of a sudden, some young hunk in a super powered something or other, a 100 horsepower, I don't know, our boat motors that
I
high?
have no idea.
I don't know either. Comes along and cuts across in front of you, creating a huge wake, high crest, low troughs, the difference between. But a smaller boat just putting along comes the other way and crosses And what happens then is they meld. The high ones and the lower ones come together, they interfere with each other, and they wind up being a different height, depth difference, amplitude. That happens with light waves as well. Because we don't really want to go there, but in one sentence, light is one of those crazy things that sometimes it acts like a wave, and a lot of color theory is taught that way. But sometimes it acts like photons, bursts of energy, concrete little burst of energy. And then we have different phenomena. But for what we're studying, almost all of it, I believe, is explained by light waves, amplitude and frequency. All right. So let's take a look at the ice crystals for a minute. Now we have some images, right?
Ice crystal.
The hexagons and the cylinders. Pictures worth 1,000 words. I thought we had them.
I don't think we do.
Oh, we don't.
Nope.
All right, you're gonna have to use your imagination, guys. There are two basic forms.
I think you were thinking about that book that we had last.
Oh, the book. The snow book? Which is right here or over there. All righty. Oh, she's gonna find a picture book for kids, which sometimes is where we ought to start, with the kids' picture books. Especially if they're well done. All righty, crystals. Two kinds, basically. One is a flat plate, 6-sided. Is a baseball home plate 6-sided or 5-sided?
I love that you think I would know that.
Yeah, well, you're a librarian. You're supposed to know everything. Where is Katharine Hepburn when you need her?
I think it's a pentagon.
That's what I thought. So we won't use that. A 6-sided flat plate is very common. Or a cylinder like a pencil with 6 sides. Now, we're on my notes here. As we condense out of the damp, freezing atmosphere into crystals, how do they know which one to make? She doesn't know this because I don't think because I never told her.
Temperature?
Temperature, yes. And what's the other big thing in the atmosphere that affects weather? Temperature and humidity. So depending on the air mass in which these crystals are forming, depending on the temperature and the humidity, one will give you the plates, the other will give you the pencils. Did I write down which is which? All righty. Now those are pure when the air is pretty clean and they form like bits of glass or crystals. Well, crystals. Most of the crystals are the beginning of a snowflake. And they're all how many sided? 6. 6-sided. And that was because of the way the hydrogen and the oxygen molecules hook together to make water. And they wind up being 6-sided. And Jordan actually asked me on the phone a month ago. He had read that every single snowflake was totally different. He said, is that possible? Yep. Billions and billions and quadrillions and however the numbers, an infinite number of snowflakes, all different. Pretty amazing. All righty. Let me see here now. If you think of those horizontal 6-sided plates floating down through the air from that cirrus cloud, and if for whatever reason they're all horizontal, in other words, it's not a mixed match, they're all pretty much this way falling, what happens? They become prisms. And we all remember Newton back in the 1600s. During one of those repercussions of the plague, they closed down the universities. He had to go home to the family estate, was bored, started experimenting with optics, among other things, and the famous experiment, close the drapes. Just a little beam of light, pass it through a clear glass prism. What appeared on the wall?
A rainbow.
A rainbow. Oh, Roy G. Bibb, a spectra. And it was always the same. Red on down to blue. Same as rainbows.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. Okay. So these flat plates falling horizontally through the upper atmosphere, the sun strikes them in such a way that they become prisms, and we see, what do we see? Sundogs.
Mm,
We do have images of sundogs,
I
right?
do.
That one? That's beautiful. Where is that? Do you know?
Illinois.
Illinois, nice and flat. Okay, we have a sun. Let's say it's setting. It could be rising, but let's say it's setting. And you'll notice there's a couple of things. There's quite a few things. There is let me think now. What do we call the circle around? Not the halo. Going blank. Ring.
Mhm.
There's the ring of light around the sun, shooting straight up from the sun, up into the sky, a sun pillar, which we'll talk about in a bit. And at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, horizontal to the horizon, two blobs of light that we call sundogs. And if you stretched out your hand as far as you could and held it up, they're about 22 degrees out from the center of the sun. And they are formed when that thin haze of alto cirrus clouds, icy clouds, about 5 miles up, they're all plates, excited, falling horizontally together, like the troops marching. Orderly troops. They're not in retreat, just scramble, scramble. They all know what they're supposed to do, and they're doing it. Okay. I have
Do you want me to show this picture?
Yeah. Let me explain that.
Okay. So I'll stop sharing this. So Mary Lou donated this book to the library, and I highly recommend it. It's a gorgeous book. But there was this image in here. And this was from April 14th, 1561. All the villagers in Normandy saw something happen in the sky, and they couldn't explain it. They didn't know what it was. Now researchers have decided it was probably a sundog that they saw, because they saw crosses in the sky. And they're probably sundogs. As the atmosphere changed, the sundog changed as well.
Okay. To follow up on that, it must have been pretty spectacular that they all noticed,
Mhm.
because this is really sad. I found on the kitty stand, which is that freebie book thing besides the box of books, and it's been there at least for 50 years, if not more. I call it the kitty stand. If you wait long enough, you can find anything you ever wanted out there. And I found a few years ago this absolutely great book written, I think, in 05, so 15 years ago now, roughly, by a British guy who was the head of something called the Cloud Spotters Society. Just like we have bird watching clubs, there's evidently this universal, you can join it if you want. I think they're probably still in existence. Cloud spotters. And one of the things he did was, you walk up and down the street and you poll people. Even though sundogs appear, let me double check here, on the average in the mid latitudes, 70 times a year, which is like what, every 5 days or so? Only 5% of Europeans that he asked had ever seen one. So that says to me, we don't look up enough. We're too busy watching where our feet go, or nowadays with our nose in the phone. And we are oblivious to all these amazing things that are happening around us. And then saying, why? See, if our ancestors a million years ago hadn't said why, we'd be still using rocks. We wouldn't have gotten out of the rock age. We'd still be in the Paleolithic, the old rock age. So keep your noses looking up and you'll see interesting things. As a matter of fact, that reminds me, years ago when I was visiting in San Diego, My daughter Laura had been doing some reading, I think psychological reading, and said, human beings tend to look pretty much straight out, or maybe 5 degrees above, but seldom look higher than that.
Mm.
And so we were going to a play at the big museum in the famous Balboa Park in the evening, and we're all hurrying to get into there on time. And all of a sudden, Laura, who had looked up, said, loud enough for everybody in the crowd to hear, like 20 people going towards the door, "Hey, there's an owl sitting up there on the ledge." And there was an owl, I forget what kind it was, sitting about 30 feet up on the ledge, right over the doorway.
Oh, wow.
So everybody kind of stopped and looked up. But we don't do that very often. So we miss out. All right. Do we have a picture of the halo around either the sun or the moon?
We have the moon.
The moon. I think that's easier to spot because
Mhm.
we don't hurt our eyes by looking at it. Now that's
I have seen one around the sun.
okay, and then that's a ring. Did they call that the halo?
Yeah.
Well, to me, a halo is just a glow that starts right at the edge of the moon or the sun and spreads out about 22 degrees again. Once again, why 22 degrees? Has to do with the angles in the ice crystals. Once again, made of water. I would call this a ring around the moon, which, let's jump ahead a minute. You've seen these, right, Melanie? A few times. What happens if you count the stars inside the ring? What does that tell you about the weather?
You said that it tells you how many days are left until the next
Rainstorm.
rainstorm.
That's an old housewives' tale, which, now, once again, depending on the time of the year, what kind of stars are in the background where the moon is there, would vary. Some are bright enough for us to see with the naked eye, and some aren't. So this would vary from where you are in the world and the time of the year, time of the night.
And now we know that there's stuff in the atmosphere. So we know we're going to get precipitation.
Okay,
soon.
usually the cirrus clouds are a forerunner of a day or two for a warm front coming in, and that usually means a low moving in, and that usually means precipitation of one sort or the other. So the size of the ring varies according, and so the idea being, I don't know. I haven't read this. I'm going to make a leap. I'm going to make a suggestion, propose a theory, which may or may not be true. As the humidity builds up, the diameter of the ring shrinks, and therefore the number of stars you see inside of it is less. Therefore, the rain is coming sooner.
Right.
So if that folklore is true, that theory of mine makes sense. All right.
I had never heard that about the number of stars.
Yeah, that was one of the early, I don't know, it was a paperback book, and I read it 20, 30 years ago, all about the weather. And they had an OU section on folklore.
Oh.
So we'll get to folklore maybe towards the end of the hour. Halos, and I suppose maybe with the ring as well, happen 100 times a year. So that's twice a week for us. And guess what they're caused by? Those pencil-shaped cylinders, not the flat. So the light is passing through those cylinders and bending in a different way, creating a different optical effect. Now, I thought this was kind of fun. Can we go back to that general picture you have with the sun pillar as well as the sundogs?
Oh, this one?
Unless you got another one.
Oh, I don't think so.
That'll do. Okay, our sun pillar goes from the sun straight up, sunrise, sunset. You can see them once in a while when you have those thin veil of clouds. They're formed when all these pencil cylinders, 6-sided, are wobbling as they fall down through the atmosphere, and they are reflecting. Make sure that's true. Reflecting the sunlight. The sun isn't passing through them, it's bouncing off of them. And then it creates this beam of light called a sun pillar. Now, do we have another general picture of those optical effects at all or not?
Just rainbow, aurora,
Okay, what's this one on the left here? On the bottom, what is that?
a rainbow.
Okay. All right, then let's go back to our upper left-hand corner, that one. Okay, the author of the Cloud Watcher book, when he introduced the chapter on optical effects connected to alto-cirrus clouds, said, throughout recorded history, some historical event that changed the world based on optical effects in the sky happened back in, he said, 312 AD, when, for those of you that remember your history, Rome still was a fairly powerful empire in the 300s, and Constantine had come to the throne. His mother's name, I think, was Helen or Helena. She, somewhere along the line, converted to Christianity, but he didn't. And in those days, Rome was a polytheistic, we would say, pagan culture with many gods and goddesses. And some of the emperors, not all of them, but some of them persecuted the Christians. There was a important battle in 312 that Constantine was fighting somebody else, I forget who, and he was well outnumbered, 50,000 to like 70 or 80,000 troops, and it didn't look too good for Constantine. And the night before, according to this legend, who knows, maybe it really happened, he had a dream in which he saw lights in the sky that resembled a cross. And a voice coming down from the heavens saying, in this sign you will conquer. So he had his soldiers paint on their tunics that sign, which was a little more elaborate than our simple Roman cross. And lo and behold, they went out and beat the opposition, which was not predicted to happen. And so at that point, shortly thereafter, Constantine, he may or may not have converted, but he allowed Christianity to become at that point one of the many religions accepted by the Roman rulers. And it was another 150 or so years before another emperor actually made it the official religion. So, who knows if this sky phenomenon hadn't happened, where Christianity would be today. We don't know. So that's an interesting historical myth, perhaps, based on fact, maybe. Alrighty. Let's look at the pictures now and see what else is happening.
We have.
Let's go with the sunset. Alrighty. Probably if any of you are parents, did your daughters, you have a boy too, right?
Nope, just girls.
Two girls. In spite of okay, tell what happened to the one the other day going home.
Oh yeah, I picked her up from.
She's 9 years old.
9 years old. Picked her up from practice after school. It was about 4:30, and she said, "Mom, it's so light. The last time you picked me up after practice, it was dark at 4:30." So she had noticed that there was more light.
Yeah, the sun was setting later, ever since December 21st.
Yeah.
About a minute every evening. So after a month, you're about half an hour more light at both ends of the day. All right, but what did your kids ever ask somewhere along the line, 3 or 4? Mom, why is the sky blue?
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you answer? Put you in embarrassing.
I don't even remember.
She doesn't remember. Well, you can't really easily explain it to a child It's cool in here today for once. I'm gonna put my jacket back on. The real reason, so
Mhm.
often we
Yeah.
make stupid reasons like it's God's favorite color, or the angels voted on it, or whatever. But of course, let's go back to what do I want to go back to? It's a type of interference, like those waves
Mhm.
behind the boats. And what happens is, see if I can remember this simply. Those light waves coming in from outer space enter our atmosphere, and depending on the size of the molecules and the atoms, for
Mhm.
us it's mostly nitrogen and oxygen, they're scattered.
Mhm.
And when the size of the molecule is closest to the wavelength, it's scattered more. And backing up just one sentence, Newton, his prism, the white light, Roy G. Biv.
Mhm.
Blue travels faster than red.
Mm.
And it just so happens that the diameter of the nitrogen and the oxygen in the atmosphere is about the same size as the wavelength
Mhm.
of the blue. And so you'll have to accept it. An act of faith. The blue gets scattered
Mhm.
all over. And so that's what we tend to see.
Mhm.
More of it's scattered to our eyes than the other colors in Roy G. Biv.
Mhm.
However, at sunset, once again, you're passing through thicker atmosphere, more polluted, dustier. Which, however, I want to take that last sentence back. I just read, I always thought polluted skies, dusty skies, made for redder sunsets, but that's not true, evidently. In pure, clean air, the intensity is much brighter.
Mm.
But my guess is, if it's pollution, clouds, or do you remember when Mount Pinatubo blew up in the Philippines in 91?
Don't.
Well, I do, because I was always interested in this sort of thing. And it's the only time a volcano put a huge American Air Force base out of business.
Mm.
They knew it was happening. They knew they were right in line. So they essentially abandoned the base, flew out what they could fly out, said to the Philippines, you can have the rest of it. And it just got buried in ash. Yeah, 91. But for 2 winters, the sunsets were amazing
Mm.
because all those aerosols, the sulfuric acid and volcanic fine dust, went way into the stratosphere above the 50,000 feet and lingered there and went all around the world. So we had these
Mhm.
spectacular sunsets.
Was this a bigger volcano than like Mount St. Helens?
Oh, yeah. Mount
Okay.
St. Helens is a relatively small one.
Okay.
Now, once again, you could research that. Maybe we will when we get off the air and see exactly what it was. It wasn't as big as Krakatoa
Okay.
in the 1880s, was that?
Mhm.
They heard the boom in Australia.
Yeah.
All right. Where are we going here? Rainbows. What other pictures have we got?
We have rainbows.
Okay.
Another rainbow.
Yeah. Do we happen to have one that shows a double rainbow?
I do not.
No.
No,
Okay.
just a single.
We'll just do the single. Isis, the goddess of the rainbow, Greek and Roman both, and she was the messenger, ran up and down this bridge delivering messages to the gods.
Mhm.
Anyway, once again, the zillions of raindrops in the atmosphere after usually a summer thunderstorm.
Mhm.
And from us, the storm has moved off to the west, and they usually happen in the afternoon.
Mhm.
So usually we see rainbows in the late spring, summer, maybe early fall. When you have a thunderstorm late in the day, the sun is hanging out in the western horizon, western part of the sky. And the rainbow appears as an arc in the east or the southeast or the northeast, depending on where the sun is. Let me think a minute. the angle of the light coming from the rainbow to your eyes is pretty much around 42 degrees, which is why when I was studying my uncles who died in the First World War, my Uncle Gus, I didn't know what division he belonged to. And I got sidetracked by the Rainbow Division, the 42nd. And that was years ago before I knew much about rainbows and 42 degrees. And now I realize the 42nd Division was nicknamed the Rainbow Division because of that connection.
Okay.
Yeah, he wasn't in that one. I found out finally what division he was in. But anyway, so once again, all those zillions of little raindrops are acting as little prisms and bending the light, refracting it, reflecting it off the inside of the drop. And then as it comes back out to your eye, it's bent again. And we wind up seeing bands of the rainbow. And you have to stand, it's always opposite the sun. However, you know that old myth about the pot of gold at the end? Why is that not possibly true?
Because there's not an end to the
What is the true shape of a rainbow?
circle.
A circle. We don't have one of those.
No, I don't.
Okay. If you've ever flown or been high up on a mountain looking down, you can see the whole circle of the rainbow. But because the earth is in the way, we only see the arc. And you can chase, that's where that idea of chasing the rainbow comes from. You can chase it towards Andover and it keeps moving, a moving target, so you never get there. All right, what other pictures have we got?
We have the aurora.
Oh, yes. All righty. And I discovered that mostly the green is due to oxygen and the red is the nitrogen. Not all the times, but the majority of times. There are all sorts of wonderful myths around the world, especially in the northern latitudes. The Inuit, the people up in Finland, the Lapps. And some of us actually went 4 or 5 years ago now to Lapland in northern Finland to see the northern lights. And they were mostly green, but they came out all 3 nights that we were up in the far north. Very simply, what's happening is think of light as photons, little particles, like bullets. And as they enter the upper atmosphere, they collide, in this case, with the oxygen, O2. And if you remember your chemistry, in the center of every molecule is the nucleus, the protons and the neutrons. And flying around like on a shell are all those electrons. Bing! It knocks off an electron, maybe to a higher level, because it absorbed that energy. It's like hitting a volleyball. You give it more energy and it goes faster. But it doesn't stay there long. It wants to go back with the crowd to its normal level. And when it falls back, it gives off energy in the form of light, which we see as the aurora. Ta-da!
One question I've always had about the aurora.
Oh, she's going to get even now.
Is so anytime I've like seen a video of it, it appears like it moves.
Yeah.
Continuously. Is that like a time lapse video or do they really move?
No, they move.
Okay.
I have seen, at least not counting Finland, 4. One was here in, the frequency of the appearances is connected, now we know, to sunspots on the sun,
Oh, sure.
which come every 11 years. So I think 2024 is going to be a peak. So when we went to Finland, we were in the trough, so to speak.
Okay.
Not fabulous. And at the peak, not only are there more of them, but they come further south. There was actually a record, I forget what year, they went as far south as Cuba, which is really unheard of. We see them here in New York, I don't know, maybe once a year or every 3 years or something. But it
does it have to be clear skies or
yes.
cloudy?
No, cloudy you won't see them because they're in the upper atmosphere, the ionosphere, way up there, like 50 miles, 100 miles, 200 miles up.
Okay.
The most beautiful one I ever saw was in October. I forget when. Let me think. In the 90s, because I had my radio show on Ralph in those
Mm.
days. And it was in October, so the leaves were down in those days. The leaves came down late September. So off to the northwest of my house were the spruce trees and the bare trees.
Mhm.
And there was a crescent new moon hanging in the trees, and the whole sky, as it got dark, was pink, a shimmering, moving
Mm.
curtain of pink, and it was
Mm.
gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So anyway, it happens once in a while. Alrighty, what other pictures do we have here?
I think that's it.
Alrighty,
No, we have our UFO.
oh, let's put the UFO up. We'll talk about one more thing before we get to that.
Oh, it's little.
Alrighty. Shadow bands, which is something I had never heard of. I don't think, but I read once again in Peterson's Guide to the Weather. And we have a big eclipse
Mhm.
coming up in a little over a year in April of 2024.
Mhm.
So this is something to put on your list. I'm going to somehow see and or record a shadow band. And what it is the 2 or 3 seconds only, don't blink, just as it goes to totality and just as it's coming out. So all you have is 2 or 3 minutes on either side of totality. And of course, you're going to be wanting to look up through
Yeah.
your goggles so I suggest you spread a sheet on the ground and set up a camera so you can record what's happening
Mm.
on the sheet in those 2 or 3 seconds.
Mm.
And what you will see is a rippling shadow moving across the sheet, a series of them. And once again, it's an optical effect when you have a very thin sliver of light passing through the atmosphere. And I'm not sure if it's just the atmosphere or they didn't say, or if it was once
Mhm.
again connected to clouds. It might just be the atmosphere, and it will create these light dark shadow bands.
It's in April in
April.
upstate New York. They say we have a 66% chance of clouds. It's a record in April. So we all need to start doing whatever dance or
Find the
prayers
virgins or
that
whatever.
we need to
Yeah.
do for a clear day. That
Oh dear. Well, there are fanatics who
yeah,
actually
they travel.
go to Antarctica
Yeah.
or wherever, Borneo, wherever, to see
Mhm.
those.
Mhm.
Oh well. All we can do is hope. Alrighty. UFOs. What is that?
This is that balloon. That
That's a UFO.
yeah, they thought it was a UFO. Yeah.
Okay, Melanie looked this all up for us, so she's going to explain what this unidentified flying object is.
Yeah, so this was over Cincinnati, Ohio, and people were convinced it was
When?
June of 2019.
Okay, recent.
Convinced it was a UFO
During the daytime.
during the daytime.
Okay.
Yep. It's really a special balloon used to create sort of access points for mobile networks. Not a UFO.
So it had a basket hanging below it, and in the basket, what was it, an antenna
Yes,
to pick up certain wavelengths for people who had internet on their phones,
yes.
but didn't live near a tower?
Yes, correct.
Ah, how clever.
Yeah.
Did it work?
It did work.
But they're no longer in business.
They're no longer in business.
All right, I'll tell you about the time I saw a UFO. It was in Indiana when we lived about a mile away through the woods in a housing development away from Earlham College. And it was probably the summertime, I think. And I do look out the windows and look up every now and again. Which reminds me, sorry. You've heard of the Nielsen ratings?
Oh yeah.
Years ago, maybe 20, in the middle of the day, they called me and they wanted to know what I was watching. And I said, well, you probably won't believe this, but since you asked, you better record it. It's a red-tailed hawk flying across my field in front of my house, hunting. And there was this dead silence.
Not what they wanted.
They wanted to hear. I have no idea if they put that in their rating for the day. Anyway, that was what I was watching. So, oh, okay, Indiana, evening time. And I look out the window, the road, and then my neighbors' houses, and I'm guessing 100 feet up or so. This round light floated by. I called up the radio station and I said, I am not one of those. I'm a very rational person, but I know what I saw. And I described it. And he laughed, the guy on the radio. And he said, well, you live near Earlham College. He said, students do things. They get helium balloons about, the size that are about 2 foot, and they net it with a basket, and then they put a candle in the basket, and then they wait for an evening with the breeze, and then they let it go.
Oh,
He said, that's probably what it is. And I think he's right.
right.
Because, yes, there still are some phenomenon, if that's how you say that word,
Mhm.
that they don't know what caused it. But the vast majority have some kind of, usually connected to what we've been talking about, optical effects in the sky due to the light waves being interfered with and changed by the atmosphere.
Mhm.
Okay, what is that it on our images? What
on
time is it?
We're at 12:20.
Oh, okay. We can slip in. Where is it? Our folklore. What did I say here? I think folklore lingers on. Most is quite ancient, goes back hundreds or even thousands of years, and it's local, based on local observations, which is what I said to Regina a couple of weeks ago when she mentioned her uncle or grandfather with his predictions of the weather, all based on folklore. Now, why is it a saying for one part of the world, not necessarily true for another? Remember that diagram of the Earth with the equator? If you live like 30 degrees north of the equator and on up into the mid latitudes, our winds are westerly. But you go the other way down south, they're the northeasterlies, which led, who was that? Benjamin Franklin, to figure out the Gulf Stream and how ships going and coming from Europe should take different routes. In that case, to go with the Gulf Stream versus the winds in the air. But it's the same sort of thing. So what's necessarily true for one part of the world wouldn't be for the other. And in most cases, these predictions of the weather, that's usually what they are. It's going to be a hard winter. I think my daughter just said to me, Mom, what happened to our hard winter? And I said, Lord, don't say it too loud. We're only in the middle of January. But except for that crazy weekend, Christmas, we've had a very mild winter. My wood pile is not vanishing.
Yeah.
Okay. Usually 1 to 3 day forecasts, but you can't make them long. We'll get to the woolly bear and all of that. You can't project 6 months, a year down the line on folklore. But some of them are based on science. And I mentioned this before. My husband Ray was a pilot, and he always said to me 30, 40 years ago, if you want to know what the weather report's going to be here in Hornell or Alfred, tune in to whatever it was, the radio station down in Bradford, PA, which is about 100 miles via road, and I'm figuring 65 as the crow flies. He said, whatever their weather is in 2 hours, it's going to be what we're experiencing because of the usual way weather systems move in this part of the world. Alrighty, but now we have eyes in the sky. Ta-da! And so we have that broader, worldwide to some extent, gathering of information. And then I had to mention the butterfly effect. Have you heard of that? What is that?
If a butterfly flaps its wings here, something will happen somewhere else.
Right. Well, to believe in that theory, that a butterfly down in the Brazil say in the the rainforest down there, the Amazon River, that it can cause a tornado, like was it yesterday up in Selma, Alabama. You have to be what I call a mechanist determinist who believes everything is orderly by math and physics, goes way back to the Big Bang, and everything is foreordained. There's no free will. It's all set in motion, and it's like a bunch of dominoes. They're all gonna fall. I don't think there's some truth to that. And either it's way too complicated that we can never figure it out, or it's not true. That's my theories. All right, let's run through. I picked out 3 folk sayings that are true scientifically, so you can rely on them. One is, I had never heard of this one. Cold is the night when the stars shine bright.
Yeah.
And the second one is, and I didn't know this until a few years ago when I was going out in August in the morning, rubbing the grass. Summer grass dry in the morning, meaning no dew. It's going to rain by late in the day. And this one, count the stars inside the ring around the moon. And that'll give you the number of days to the rain. Well, all 3 basically show the amount of humidity in the atmosphere. And as we know, the more humid it is, the more likely it is to rain or snow. Okay, my grandmother always said, rain before 7, clear before 11. And I often
Before 7.
clear before 11. I often say this in the morning when it's raining. Well, that also is basically true because most rainstorms, or I suppose that would be snow, only last 4 hours at the most.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
They have a finite amount of water.
Yeah, right. Or they're moving at a certain rate and they pass you by. Alrighty. She also said, when the robins, this is summertime up at our bungalow, up the Hudson River, about 60 miles from New York City. When robins sing at 4 in the afternoon, it's going to rain. Well, if it really gets dark and cloudy, the robins might think it's
sure.
getting dark. And by the way, that's another thing to do for the eclipse. Quite often birds start singing their night songs for those minute or 2 of darkness, or as it gets dark. Well, I think it's simpler to simply say, gee, Grandma, the clouds are getting really thick and dark. I think it's going to rain. I have to wait for the robin to let me know. All right. And finally, because we're running out of time. Now, I know people who believe this will not believe me. That's just the way we are. We get set in our ways and we will not look at the truth. Woolly bears have no way of knowing what it's going to be in the winter. And the same thing with the groundhog.
Oh, yeah, the groundhog.
Dogs. Poor old Willie. Wake him up, drag him out of his. If I were Willie, I would just sit there and do nothing. I want to go back to sleep. But that idea of 6 more weeks of winter, it's cloudy, right?
It's February 2nd. You're getting 6 more weeks of winter no matter
what. Well, maybe not anymore.
Maybe not anymore.
All righty. Next time, what everybody has been waiting for, our disaster program.
Okay.
Hurricanes and tornadoes. And evidently Alabama got socked pretty hard, 2 nights ago? A day or 2 ago?
Yeah.
Thursday, I think. Well, maybe a day ago, whatever it was. Shreveport, which is near where my father's ancestors settled in the 1800s. Anyway, and we here, so far anyway, we don't usually have to worry about tornadoes. Maybe floods if you're down in the valley, or maybe a fire, although we are pretty good at being able to put them out. Whatever. So anyway, that's what we're going to discuss. Why they happen, what kind of events in the atmosphere create them, where are they found. Now, if you live in Montana, I don't think you ever have to worry about a hurricane, right? If you live at the North Pole, I doubt you ever saw a tornado,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's site specific.
Mhm.
All right, so we'll discuss those. And let me think, what else? That leaves February, which is gonna be the end of our program,
Mhm.
the 2 time. And I've decided to wrap it all up basically with what's happening with the climate
Mhm.
and talk about how that has affected our weather.
Mhm.
And for all I know, maybe my grandson in San Diego, I don't think the rains are that bad down there.
Oh, right.
He might be living in a shelter because his house got washed away. Who knows? And that's why he didn't tune in. But California, which
Mhm.
often gets only 10 inches of rain a year,
Mhm.
evidently got 8 inches in one day
Mhm.
somewhere. I forget where exactly.
Yeah, I'm not sure where exactly.
So, if I had tried to teach this 10 or 20 years ago, people would have.
Mhm.
But now so many of these weather disasters
Mhm.
are happening that never used to happen,
Mhm.
or maybe once in 100 or 1,000 years.
Mhm.
People are sitting up and taking notice. I might not believe it, but Mother Nature doesn't care.
Mhm.
She's gonna dump it on us.
Mhm.
So we have to do something. Okay, so that's it for this week.